Hello, this is Founder Leroon. I am here with Lady Shell, and we are going to start our new series today. This is Fantasy Grounds Unity A through Z with Lady Shell and Leroon. Today's topics are accounts and connectivity. How are you doing, Lady Shell?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful Sunday. How is it by you?
It is actually gorgeous. We put up our tarp and it'll turn out good.
You mean heat like 80 degrees?
In the mid 80s, actually.
I wish it was 80 degrees here. It's not that hot today, but I believe upper 90s.
That's hot for me. Okay, so back to the topics. So we have a slideshow prepared for you, and we're going to go through these slides one at a time. We're going to discuss them, and I have my little handy dandy laser pointer. I don't know if anyone sees that, but today we're going to just talk about mainly your accounts and how Fantasy Grounds is kind of started and set up. And Lady Shell has some links that she can put in the chat. And later on, we are going to have some things archived for you. So this show will be archived and we'll make a playlist and everything else. So, Lady Shell, would you like to start off with anything on this front screen here? Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, go ahead.
So this screen is what you will get after you install the demo. You want to download the demo that's going to suit your needs. In this case, we're talking about Fantasy Grounds Unity. You can also do Fantasy Grounds Classic if that's what suits your needs. Mainly, we want to have this series available and updated for new users and for people that are making the change from Classic to Unity. We're going to try to cover some topics to make things easier for you and also for our faculty and our community. So this is the launch screen, and what you'll find on this front page is it'll give you an indicator that the lobby is connected. On the top left corner, you have your quick start guide, user manual, your guides. All this content in the very front is very helpful. These are links straight to the forums, or if you needed customer support, the email's right there in the interface. Very handy. But this is basically what you're going to find up on the top left corner. There's a couple icons up there that we'll go over. In the quick start guide, that will take you to a link where you can follow along and get to know some of Fantasy Grounds Unity or Fantasy Grounds Classic, the interface. So on this next slide, this is from the settings tab on the front page. And this is the basic tab that will come up, the first tab that you'll come across. And what we have here are some options. Mainly, you want to put in your official Fantasy Grounds forum. So you can use the official Fantasy Grounds forum username and password that you will use on the official website. This gives you access to the store, to your purchase content if you have any, and the official forums where you can look for help or do research or troubleshoot. So make sure that you get this entered in here first. And then if you purchase Fantasy Grounds, any sort of license, then you will store that key in this area. Usually they email it to you. Sometimes it'll go to your junk mail, but it will be stored in your account purchase history on the website. We will show you that slide shortly. If you're familiar with Fantasy Grounds or you need a little bit more space or real estate, you can adjust the Fantasy Grounds application UI scale from this point. I don't recommend anything lower than 80%. I think between 80 and 90 is a good medium number without making it too small or too big. So just be careful with that, play around with that setting, and you can also adjust it with a command once you're in the program. Lady Shell, can you tell us about the different types of licenses that are available for somebody who would want to start with Fantasy Grounds?
When you start with Fantasy Grounds, there are several licenses. Of course, there's the demo, which is free, and everybody can get that and check out what you can do. However, you cannot save to a demo, so you would need a license. And the two licenses available are either a standard license or a ultimate license, and the same for both Classic and Unity. What's the difference between them? So, a Fantasy Grounds standard license will let a DM host games for only one demo user. If another person comes on your demo or a license, then that demo user gets kicked off. So you can only have the one person. They can also host people with a license, as many as they want. And the difference between standard and ultimate is that ultimate can host a number of demos or even all of their players can be using the demo account. So that's the difference between the two.
And that's true of Classic and of Unity. They both have those different levels of accounts. You can also get a subscription. So if you don't want to pay the money up front, you can get subscriptions, and they even have deals and upgrades that, if you started with a standard and you want to go up to a ultimate, they have a discount for that. So they got you covered pretty much from every angle. And I know that SmiteWorks is considering different billing options and different options to help people get started. But just remember, your license key will be emailed to you. Make sure you check your junk mail before you panic. Sometimes your filter and your email program will filter it out. The other thing is, make sure you have your username and your password that you use with the website. That is how you log in to Fantasy Grounds store and to purchase your license and that sort of thing. That's what pulls in your data, and it kind of handshakes between the client and the account that you have on fantasygrounds.com. Once you do that and you hit save, then it will pull in the data, and then you go back to the launch screen, and it'll have a little check for updates here on the bottom. It'll turn red, or you'll just do it manually even if it doesn't, and it'll pull in all your data, and then your license will change up here on the top right to whatever license level that you purchased. So up on the top right here where I got the mouse laser pointer, that is where this will change. So that's the first part, is getting your account set up on the website, getting Fantasy Grounds installed, and then going into your settings and going to the settings area and actually getting your account established and set up. Once you've done that, you shouldn't have to mess with it too much more unless you have some errors. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide here is how you would link your account. So this is assuming you already have your account set up. If you have a Steam account where you purchased Fantasy Grounds, or a Paizo account, which is the partner that Fantasy Grounds has and SmiteWorks has with Paizo, this is where you would get direct links to link up your account. Steam, all that does is allows you to purchase content. It doesn't really host Fantasy Grounds. It does keep track of how many hours you put into it. You technically don't need Steam to launch Fantasy Grounds, but to manage your purchases and your licenses, you need Steam for that. Other than that, Steam is just a way to purchase and keep track of your purchases. It's a storefront basically, and I only really recommend it if you're a big, huge Steam person or you're in another country. If you're in the United States, it's actually a lot easier and a lot cleaner to go directly through the website. But if you have a bunch of gift cards and trades and those sort of things, and you're already in Steam all the time, then so be it. But if you don't use Steam that often and you're in the US, you really don't need it. Paizo is just a second party, third party publisher that publishes content that is directly related to a fantasy and sci-fi world setting. If you link your account with Paizo, if you've already purchased content on there, and this is not the hardback stuff, so this is only PDFs, digital content, it will synchronize with Fantasy Grounds, and we'll go through how to set that up. So this is basically all this is direct links to these particular sections to help you link your accounts up. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and this slide will actually kind of start going into that details. So here is where those links will bring you to. In your order history, and it's discussed a little earlier, you have your actual purchases. So if you're logged in, which you need to make sure you're logged into the website, you can go to your order history, and when you click on that, it'll pull up all of your purchases. So if you lost your key in the mail and you didn't get it, you can go to the order history and look at that, and your key will be in there along with anything else if you purchased anything. The next thing is the Paizo account sync and the Steam account sync. These are the two areas that we were going to cover. So these two areas are what you're going to use to synchronize your account with your Fantasy Grounds account and with Steam and or Paizo.
I wanted to make one additional comment regarding
Mm-hmm.
Steam.
Yep.
Is that the reason I don't like to use Steam and I'd rather use the Fantasy Grounds just direct, is because Steam takes additional resources. So, if you're kind of low on RAM and stuff, you probably would be better where you don't have to load an additional program in order to access.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another thing is if you swap back and forth between Fantasy Grounds, Steam, and the Fantasy Grounds store, it may take a while for your library to get updated. So, in other words, if you buy a couple things on Steam and then you turn around and buy them on the Fantasy Grounds store, and then you synchronize everything, it might take a little while for your purchases to show up on Steam. Another thing is Unity is not quite ready to be released on Steam yet. So you have to keep that in mind. I don't know an exact date. Okay, next slide. So this deals with the actual Steam account synchronization. So this is in the tab that was up on the right under your store history. When you connect the account, you're going to put your Steam ID in and connect the account, and then you're going to hit refresh Steam purchases, and it's going to pull in your purchases, and it's going to recognize that what you've purchased. Whenever you buy something new, or if you do a nice shopping spree, come back to this page and refresh it after you purchase things on Steam. That way you make sure that this has synchronized with Fantasy Grounds. And once that happens, then you can update your client, and then it will pull in any of your purchases from the Fantasy Grounds store. So nothing is actually hosted on Steam. It just hosts the idea that you have purchased the content. That's all it does. There's no files. There's nothing on there except for your key and how many hours you put into it. The next slide is basically the same thing, but this shows you what it will look like once you refresh your account. So it says Steam purchases refresh. So that is your indicator that process has happened. Next, we go to the Paizo account synchronization. Now, this is the website for Paizo.com. If you have an account there or not, you need to sign up first. And if you're already a member, you'll already be familiar with this website. Once you sign up your account, you're going to go to your account settings, which is in this drop-down menu. Once you're in there, you're going to look for a thing called digital partnerships or authorized partnerships. Once you go there, then you will see a screen like this, and it's in a website that Lady Shell has a link for. It's paizo.com/paizo/account/partners. And you'll get this activation code. I've blacked mine out for security reasons, but once you have your activation code, this is the code that you're going to put in on the Fantasy Grounds website area. And once you synchronize it, you go back and you refresh your purchases on the website. So this is in the Paizo website store area under your account data. Once you've done that, then you're going to go back to this part of the process, which is on fantasygrounds.com under your account, under the drop down for store. And you're going to authorize the account first by that code that you get from Paizo. And then you're going to click on retrieve all Paizo.com purchases. So if you purchased any PDFs, this does not include the hardback. So if you purchased a hardback book, it does not count. It only counts with the digital PDF products. So if you are going to do that, purchase PDFs or anything, or maybe you have some old ones left over from a long time ago, you can click this retrieve Paizo purchases. It sends that data to SmiteWorks, and it stores it. And what will happen is if you purchase anything on the Fantasy Grounds store, you will get that at cost, meaning that it removes the cost of the PDF from it. So you've already paid for the PDF. You're not going to pay for the PDF again. So your cost will be reduced anywhere from $5 to $20, depending on the product. If you have product that is on the Fantasy Grounds store, you can send the purchases that you've already purchased on Fantasy Grounds to the Paizo website. Once you've done that, then you can download your PDFs from the Paizo.com store. When you purchase things from Paizo, you'll notice their price is a little bit higher, and usually that's because it is including both the PDF and the Fantasy Grounds copy. That's why it may seem a little higher than some of the other products, because you're getting two things. You're getting a digital copy and you're getting a PDF copy of the product that you're purchasing. Now, I was told that this does not work through Steam. So if you want to do all this and you purchase it through Steam, it's not going to carry over to Paizo. And I'm not sure why that is. And I try to have it explained to me, but basically there's no communication between Steam and Paizo. Everything is between Fantasy Grounds, SmiteWorks, and Paizo. So if you want this partnership to work, you'll have to do this part on the website from Fantasy Grounds. Otherwise, you'll miss the discount. So that's important to know that.
Yeah, speaking of discounts, going back to what we had talked to previously about the bundles.
Yep.
Scuba mentioned the bundle issues. And that is that if you purchase some of your stuff on Smiteworks and some of your stuff on Steam, if you want to go for a bundle, you're not going to get, they don't communicate together as the purchase. Like you have to buy everything all on one store or the
Right.
other.
That is
The
correct.
other the other thing I wanted to say is if you are on Steam and you wish to move your all your stuff over to the Smiteworks website, you can do this. I did do this. I contacted the Fantasy Grounds support and they were able to pull my information from the Steam account to the Smiteworks account. I mean, not that it wasn't there already, but then my all my bundles would be if I bought anything additionally on the Smiteworks site, they all counted because everything was all pulled over there. This works that way only from Steam to Fantasy Grounds, not from Smiteworks to Steam. But if you do want to do that, you can contact them and they will do that for you.
Perfect. That's good to know. So if you've already purchased a few things on Steam and you realize you don't want to do that anymore, you can go from Steam to Fantasy Grounds Smiteworks store. But you cannot take all of your Smiteworks content and convert that over to Steam. So that's good to know. This screen here is showing you what it will look like when you send your purchase info to Paizo. So if you own any content on the Smiteworks store, this is just an example. You'll get this green dialog below that lets you know which catalog numbers are owned, and that sends that over to the Paizo store. And then if you go to the Paizo store, you can download any content that's associated with these particular products, provided that they are either map packs or PDFs or whatever they are, or adventure paths. So make sure that you understand how that process works. A lot of people get confused. They don't understand what happened and they just kind of get frustrated. So that's why we're doing this stream, to help you out with that. So the next slide has to do with the Advanced tab on the settings. So this is something I generally advise people not to mess with. When you install Fantasy Grounds, it has a default app directory and a data directory. Some of the confusion between Unity and Classic has come up over the months, and I'm not sure if that has been fixed or if people are doing it intentionally, but I would try to leave the default app directory and data directory. And the reason I black these out is because I don't want to be responsible if people are looking at mine and says, well, Founder Leroon has it in this directory, it should work for me too. I'm not going to be responsible for that, but make sure that Classic and Unity are in different directories. If they are in the same directory, it'll cause issues. The other thing is there is a live build and a test build and a beta build. Unless you are a developer or you know what you're doing, I would not mess with that. I would leave advanced logging on. That's on purpose, so in case you have any errors, you can send advanced logs to Smiteworks. So I put a caveat here. Please do not mess with or change this unless you know what you're doing or if you're a developer. Proceed with caution. So don't mess with this unless you know what you're doing. The only thing I could tell you here is maybe the uninstall. You might use that if you have to troubleshoot or to save some data, but I would not mess with this area at all. Next slide. So this is just an example of the updater. Every now and then you'll get on the launch screen, you'll get a red brick that'll say it's time to update. On Classic, you will get that occasionally, and usually it's on Tuesdays when they update Fantasy Grounds. Now, no telling you what time Tuesday, but they're usually big or incremental updates on Tuesdays. However, since Fantasy Grounds Unity is still in test mode, you can potentially have more than one update in one day. You can have several updates. So the caveat with that is when you are updating, and if you are the host or even a player, make sure that everybody that's on your table or in your group has the same version of Fantasy Grounds. That has been a big problem because different people will update at different times. So if you're the host or your Fantasy Grounds, let your players know that you've recently updated and that they need to do so before they try to connect to your table. And try to do it like less or more than 5 minutes before your game starts. So do not update Fantasy Grounds 2 minutes before it's go time, you want to give yourself at least an hour and give your players time to update as well. So if you have a mismatch in the actual client, a lot of things can break during your game. So make sure that everyone is on the same version. And it's very simple. Whenever the host updates, he needs to let the players know. And as players, you need to not update until your game master tells you it's time. Otherwise, when you connect to his table, if you have a fresher copy than he does, potentially it's not going to let you connect or it will corrupt the data. So this is a very common issue with Fantasy Grounds at this moment. Once it's in final release, this will smooth out. There'll be less updates and there'll be less mismatch.
I noticed now I didn't play my game on Unity, but I know when I was in Classic last week, I had somebody log on to my table and they had a different version, and it does show the DM different, that it says connected, the things don't match or something. So if there was some kind of problem, so you could point to that and say, oh, you really should have the same version as me.
Right. Normally that doesn't cause as big of an issue on the Classic version, whereas on Unity, there are some networking settings that could cause problems. So generally, they're not updating the network on Classic. In Unity, they're constantly updating. Sometimes it is network related, sometimes it's not. When you update Fantasy Grounds, quite often the update will include an update to the updater. So that means the updating software needs to update. So when that happens, let it do its thing. Do not exit. Let it fully install. It will reboot and it will go back to wanting to update again. So if the updater needs updating, let it do it. If you stop it in the middle of its cycle, you could corrupt it and you might have to reinstall the program. So make sure you let it do its thing when the updater is going to be updated. And that happens occasionally, maybe once every 3 weeks or so, at least until final. On this slide here, this goes into the troubleshooting tab. What this is if you're running into problems, this will take you to shortcuts on gathering your logs. You can force an app update. You can clear your settings. You can actually go through and it'll show you your setup, and you can clear your vault, which is basically erasing everything you've purchased. And what that'll do is if there's any files corrupted, Fantasy Grounds will reinstall them. So that is a way to troubleshoot Fantasy Grounds. There's a handy link here where it says a full description of these tools can be found here. Since there's no dialog box that explains what all these do, there's a website link. Make sure that you use these tools if you are having trouble with Fantasy Grounds. One of the things that people are experiencing now in a lot of cases is the network things, and a lot of that isn't just SmiteWorks or the software client. It's a lot of little things added up, and it's usually user error or maybe a misunderstanding of what's happening with Unity. It is still in beta first run thing, so you want to make sure that you're up on top of it and that you understand your tools and where to go when to report errors.
Do people get as many problems with connecting as a LAN connection rather than a cloud connection, or are they?
It's kind of equal, and usually what it ends up being is on the player side, or maybe the game master is hosting with a wireless connection or something like that. We will do a show on that separately on how to troubleshoot the connectivity, give people ideas of what to look for, what to avoid. And these will be based off of input from personal experience, from observing others, and from input from our people that are helping in the Ask the Expert section. So now we're going to go to Create Campaign. So this is on the main launch screen. So we've already done settings and we've talked about updating. Now we're going to talk about creating a campaign. So a campaign is just another way of saying session. I wish they would have just said session, because campaign makes it sound like, okay, you're starting this game and it's going to continue on forever. Well, actually, this is just a session. So as the host or game master, you can create your own campaign or session. Select a given rule set, which in this case it was 5th edition. Try to remember to create an initial test campaign session for experiments, new products, or for testing new modules or extensions. Create a separate campaign for your actual games or campaigns. So that means that you want to have 2 different folders, one for messing about and testing things, the other for your actual game. That's like more of a tip than you have to. The other thing is that all the rule sets are slightly different, but this part of it is fairly similar. And when you want to actually host a game after you create a campaign, you are going to put in your server settings as to how you want to run it. So you can set to private, you can set it to public and cloud, and that way if you want the campaign name to show up to the public, you can do so from here. And then before you load into the game, you can pick any extensions. What's the word of advice on extensions, Lady Shell?
Less is more.
That's right. Less is more. The less or the least amount of these extensions you can load, the better. There'll be less compatibility issues, less chances to crash, less cases of error. So if you suspect a problem with your Fantasy Grounds, try to disable your extensions one at a time to narrow it down. Make sure your extensions are compatible with Unity, and make sure you do the research before you use them. You have to keep up on extensions if you want to use them on a weekly basis. You cannot install them and then walk away from it. You actually have to make sure that if they are third-party extensions, that you keep up with them. That means you go to the place where you download them, you read about them, you keep up to date on them, and you actually participate in the discussion when you're having trouble with it. Extensions are not formally supported by Fantasy Grounds unless they come with the program. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes the author will quit updating. Sometimes they'll give up on the project. Sometimes you'll have to take it over if you know what you're doing. So be careful with extensions. Try not to rely on them. The other thing is that you will probably have different problems with connectivity because people will not be able to find your campaign. They're not used to the interface. Those are all things that will get better or go away once Unity is fully released. So here is a load campaign. So this would be if you're loading an existing campaign that you've already created. So in this case, I had a campaign called Convention Games. It was a 5e game. I put a password on here, and if I wanted to put a chat name, I could. I had it set to cloud and public, and then I had a couple minor extensions that probably will not break Fantasy Grounds. And here I've blocked out my IP addresses, but this is where they would show. Now, once you load the campaign, you will load into Fantasy Grounds. So in this case, I'm saying and stating up here, load an existing campaign, test session, or the popular 5e sample campaign, in which you can read the manual and follow along to see some of Fantasy Grounds' basic features. You will not be able to save, alter, or change things in the read-only 5e sample campaign. And that's because it's just a test campaign. It's supposed to be used when you read along with the sample, and it will help you kind of get used to some of the features as a new user. There is the load screen options. So also on the main page, when you launch Fantasy Grounds, on the top left corner, you will have your data folder. This is the back end. This is the directory where Fantasy Grounds is storing most of its data. Here it says to learn where and what each of the highlighted folders are. So these little boom signals, I don't know what you call those, but they're like stars. You're going to drop the applicable custom or third-party files and manage your own assets in a given folder depending on the application or use. So you have a campaigns folder, that's where you manage your campaigns. And if you notice you're getting a huge list of campaigns and you don't play them anymore, you can go into your campaign folder and delete them. Make sure you take out any artwork if you want to save it. But you cannot delete campaigns from the front screen. You have to actually go on the back end and delete campaigns that you no longer use. You have an extensions folder. This is where all of the extensions will go. And if you load them in there first, and then you start Fantasy Grounds, they'll show up. If you add them while Fantasy Grounds is running, your extensions or your modules will not show up. So you have to shut down Fantasy Grounds, add your extensions or your modules or anything you want to change, and then load Fantasy Grounds. But make sure that you restart Fantasy Grounds and then they will show up if you put them in the right directory. So you have campaigns, you have extensions, you have images, you have modules, you have portraits, tokens, and then the vault is where all of your store purchases are stored, and they're encrypted files. These are pretty much the only Fantasy Grounds backend files that you need to mess with. I don't usually mess with cache or the documents or the rule sets or utilities or anything like that, just the ones that I've highlighted. Now, make sure that you understand that Portraits is a universal folder. So if you put Portraits in this one, it's going to be available for all your campaigns. Same thing with tokens. If you put tokens in this folder, it will be available for all your campaigns, provided they're compatible. A lot of people will have these folders in their campaign folder. That means only that campaign will have those tokens and portraits, unless, of course, you have them duplicated. So that is something you need to understand about Fantasy Grounds. One good tip is to create a folder shortcut to this main folder so that you don't have to launch Fantasy Grounds to access this main directory. It's kind of tedious that you have to launch the program, then come up here and open it. You're better off taking this data and making a shortcut that's available, so you can hit copy path, paste shortcut, and you can paste that on your launch screen or on your desktop so it's easier to get to this. I wouldn't mess with these files unless you know what you're doing. The only thing I could say is when you have a campaign and you want to add custom content, you can do it through the interface, but I think it's smoother and a lot cleaner when you actually move that stuff from your directories and your folders into your campaigns manually, so you understand what you've brought over. Make sure you do it in an organized fashion. Don't just dump a whole bunch of photos in there, because that's not the right way to do it. You have different file types, you have different size. You need to really be organized before you start doing it. This is basically just an example of a log. So when you pull in the logs when you're having trouble, let's say you're having connectivity issues or Fantasy Grounds keeps crashing, when you gather and compile a log, it actually saves as a zip file. So please use this option to retrieve and gather logs for troubleshooting and forward them to the official Fantasy Grounds forums to help pin down issues with Fantasy Grounds Unity. This is a community effort. It's not just a SmiteWorks problem. The more test and error data SmiteWorks can receive, the faster for the final release date. And that's a personal statement. You don't have to agree with that, but that's what I believe. And that is accessible from this little grid line up here and also in the troubleshooting tip slide that we showed earlier. Send that log to customer support or attach it in the Fantasy Grounds forums in the correct area, and hopefully someone will look at that and be able to interpret what the problems might be. And here is an example of the forums. There is a section in the forums. It is called Fantasy Grounds Unity Early Release. When you have issues, come here, do a little reading, see if someone else is already having a problem such as yours. Also, if you want to know what's the latest updates, like here you have the Fantasy Grounds Early Access updates. This will tell you all the major updates that have happened. The incremental updates are usually just little word fixes or potentially adding line of sight to a map that didn't have one. But the major updates will be listed here in the early access area. And then you have all these threads started by community members, and the ones that are stickied are the ones that are common. So if you're having an updater issue or permission issues or connection issues, those are all stickied. Go through there and read those and see if they match. So please read, report, research, and utilize this resource to help troubleshoot and educate yourself on the most recent changes, developments, and Fantasy Grounds Unity fixes. This is more advice than it is, but I recommend that you get used to doing this until they have the final release at least. And back to this launch screen again, joining a campaign. So we didn't touch or go over too much on the player side, but on the player side, you have join campaign. Provided that your game master has given you your public game name and the DM's name, and this is the account holder's name, this is how you would join a campaign if it was hosted publicly on the cloud. If it's not, if it's a private game, you're going to have to know the direct IP address, which will be entered here. The port is already set. And this is also if your game master has opened up his computer to allow people to connect. One thing I wanted to mention is, as the host, if you want to see how things look on the player side, you can connect to yourself locally. So what that means is in this box, once you start a second instance of Fantasy Grounds, so in other words,
You got a typo in there.
yeah, well,
It should be local host.
yep. So localhost is one word. So it's not, there's no space, and I have it, Lady Shell pointed out I have it misspelled. But you type localhost in here, and it's all one word, one phrase. And you do that after you've already loaded an existing campaign as the game master or the host. Once you've done that, then you'll launch Fantasy Grounds again, and it needs to be either Classic or Unity. You can't connect two platforms together. They're not compatible. So if you launch Unity, you start your campaign. Once that's done, then you relaunch Fantasy Grounds again, and you join as a player, and you put in localhost in here. Then you hit start, and you'll be connecting to yourself. So then you can tab back and forth to see what it looks like between your client and your player side. So this is how you would do that. You just type localhost, it's one phrase, in this area here, and it will allow you to join your own table. If you have an antivirus or some sort of networking thing going on, that is probably something that you'll have to troubleshoot. Normally this works. If you have some advanced wireless or some kind of security protocol, you might have to know a little bit more about networking to get it to work. But localhost is what you type in here to connect to yourself. So you'd have two copies of Fantasy Grounds running, one as the host, one as the client. Okay, so that is basically the major topics that we're going to cover in this session. Lady Shell, do you have any other things you'd like to bring up that we may have missed or that we should discuss before we call it a show?
I can't think of anything, but does anybody have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, good question. So here I wrote, you made it. You should now be on your way to using Fantasy Grounds Unity as the host or a game master. If this screen seems to take forever, which this is the load screen, it is fairly common, especially if you have a ton of third-party content and assets. So in other words, if you have 50,000 modules and a whole bunch of tokens and tons of assets and images, then this load screen is going to take a little longer. Fantasy Grounds has to go through and catalog and go through and check all those files before it loads. So if you don't like the load time, try reducing the amount of extra things that you have, and that should help the load time a little bit. The other thing is make sure you have enough hard drive space. You'd be amazed at how many people have complained that Fantasy Grounds doesn't work, Unity in particular, and you go and ask them how much hard drive space they have, and they have like 1 gig left. So you want to make sure you have enough hard drive space to run Fantasy Grounds. I would say at least 10 gigs, if not more. There's probably a minimum number. I'm just saying that hypothetically. I would say 50 gigs, if or more. But you don't want to have 2 or 3 megabytes left and expect it to run. Also, we will continue with some troubleshooting tips in a future video to help you troubleshoot and deal with connections issues. These tips have been gathered by the experience and the members from the community. So if you guys are one of those people, I highly recommend that you go to the forums first. Or if you can't go, if you don't like that, you can come into Fantasy Grounds College. Lady Shell has the links to our community Discord. Go to Ask the Experts, ask for a little bit of help, and make sure you do a little research and reading yourself. I don't know how many times people have come in and they want everything handed to them on a plate. You need to actually do a little work too. So when you come in with a little bit of, at least a little bit of learning under your belt, and that will help with the situation. Always start with, okay, I'm using a PC, I'm using Unity, or I'm using Classic. Those are basic things we need to know to help you. So come prepared if you can. Thanks, Lady Shell, for helping, and I hope this helps people in the future. If you are watching this video and it's 3 months from now, just know that now is August 2nd, 2020. If this is farther down the line, it may be that Fantasy Grounds has changed a little bit. But for the most part, most of this advice should still remain true. So until next time, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.